My name is Beverly, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought a single family dinner could destroy everything I believed about love, worth, and belonging. That evening in our Connecticut dining room, my father would call me worthless while handing my sister $1 million inheritance. But what happened next when my quiet grandmother slowly rose from her chair with a secret that would change everything? Left our family shattered in ways we never imagined possible. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family secrets that change everything. Trust me, what my grandmother revealed that night will leave you speechless, just like it did our entire family. Now let me take you back to that fateful evening when everything I thought I knew about my place in this world came crashing down. Growing up as the middle child in the Morrison family meant living in the shadow of my younger sister Camila, who was 25 and absolutely everything my parents had ever dreamed of in a daughter. While I struggled through community college and worked double shifts as a dental assistant and weekend barista just to pay rent on my tiny studio apartment, Camila glided through law school with our parents footing every bill, from her designer wardrobe to her luxury car payments. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When I was 12 and won the school spelling bee, my parents missed the ceremony because they were touring private high schools with Camila. When I graduated community college with honours while working full-time, they threw Camila a massive party for making Dean's List at her expensive university. The pattern was so consistent that I'd stopped expecting anything different, but hope has a way of sneaking back in when you least expect it. My father, Robert, and mother, Patricia, had built a successful real estate development company, and their pride in Camila's accomplishments knew no bounds. She was engaged to Jonathan, a banker whose family owned half of downtown Hartford, and everything about her life screamed success in the way my parents understood it. Meanwhile, I collected coupons, bought generic groceries, and dreamed of someday opening my own dental practice, though I'd never dared share that dream with anyone except my grandmother Dorothy. Grandma Dorothy was different from the rest of my family. At 76, she had this quiet way of observing everything while saying very little. She lived in the guest house behind my parents' main residence, and she was the only person who ever seemed to truly see me. When I'd visit her on Sunday afternoons, she'd ask about my work, remember the names of my patients, and encourage my secret night school business courses that I was taking to prepare for eventually starting my own practice. The family announcement had been building for weeks. My parents had been dropping hints about making some major decisions regarding inheritance and family legacy. At 28, I found myself hoping against hope that maybe, finally, they would recognize that I had value too. Maybe they would see that working multiple jobs while putting myself through school showed character and determination. Maybe they would acknowledge that I'd never asked them for money, never gotten into trouble, never caused them a moment's worry the way some children do. As I drove to their house that evening, I practiced what I might say if they surprised me with some gesture of support or recognition. I imagined my father acknowledging my work ethic, my mother expressing pride in my independence. I even dared to dream they might offer some financial help toward my dental practice dream. The cruel irony of hope is that it makes the fall so much more devastating when reality hits. The house looked exactly as it always did, perfectly manicured and imposing, with Camila's BMW parked in the circular driveway next to our parents' matching Mercedes. I pulled my 10-year-old Honda up behind them, the contrast feeling more stark than usual. Walking up to that front door, I had no idea I was about to experience the most humiliating and transformative evening of my entire life. The formal dining room had been set with our mother's finest china, the kind reserved for special occasions and important announcements. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and everything felt ceremonial in a way that made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Camilla sat beside Jonathan, her engagement ring catching every sparkle of light, while I took my usual seat across from them next to Grandma Dorothy, who squeezed my hand gently under the table. My father stood at the head of the table, chest puffed with the self-importance that came so naturally to him. He'd clearly prepared a speech, and the formality of the moment made everyone sit a little straighter. Patricia and I have been giving considerable thought to our family's future and legacy, he began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in business meetings. We believe in rewarding success, achievement, and potential. The words hung in the air like a judgment I hadn't realized was coming. My mother nodded approvingly, her perfectly styled hair not moving even as she leaned forward with anticipation. Camilla tried to look surprised, but I caught the slight smile she couldn't quite suppress, and my heart began to sink even before the real blow landed. Camilla. My father continued, turning toward my sister with genuine warmth in his eyes. Your law degree, your engagement to Jonathan, your entire trajectory shows us exactly the kind of success we want to support and encourage. Therefore, we're giving you $1 million to secure your future help with your wedding and provide the foundation for the kind of life we've always envisioned for you. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1 million. I tried to keep my expression neutral, tried to hold on to the possibility that they had something planned for me too, even if it was smaller. Surely they wouldn't call us both here just to give everything to Camilla. Surely there was some recognition coming for me, some acknowledgement that I had value too. But then my father's eyes turned to me, and I saw something in his expression that I'd been trying not to see my entire life. Disappointment, disdain, complete dismissal. "Beverly," he said, and my name sounded heavy with judgment in his mouth. "Frankly, you've been a disappointment to this family. Community college, working service jobs, no real prospects or achievements. You're worthless to this family's legacy, and we see no point in throwing good money after bad." The word worthless echoed in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. 28 years of trying to earn their love, 28 years of hoping they'd see my value, and this was their final verdict. I sat frozen, unable to process the casual cruelty of what had just happened. My own father had called me worthless in front of the entire family, and my mother was nodding as if he'd just commented on the weather. Camilla reached across the table and patted my hand with fake sympathy. "Beverly, I'm sure you understand that success has to be rewarded," she said sweetly, but I could hear the smugness underneath. "Maybe this will motivate you to finally do something meaningful with your life." Jonathan nodded along, clearly uncomfortable, but not willing to challenge his future in-laws. The conversation moved on to wedding plans and investment strategies with my parents and Camilla, discussing how the money might be used. They talked about upgrading Camilla's car, maybe buying a vacation home, certainly throwing the wedding of the century. I sat there in complete shock, fighting back tears, feeling smaller and more invisible than I ever had in my life. But Grandma Dorothy hadn't said a word. She sat beside me, her weathered hands folded carefully in her lap, watching everything with those sharp blue eyes that seemed to see straight through people's pretenses. I caught her looking at me once, and something in her expression made me sit up a little straighter. There was determination there and a kind of quiet anger that I'd never seen from her before. The weight of my father's words settled over me like a suffocating blanket as memories of my childhood came flooding back. This wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed, overlooked, or pushed aside for Camilla's golden path. But somehow, having it stated so bluntly made every previous slight feel fresh and raw again. I remembered being 14 when my high school guidance counselor called to tell my parents I'd been selected for a prestigious summer academic program. My mother took the call in the kitchen while preparing dinner, and I stood hopefully nearby, waiting for her reaction. "Oh, that's nice," she said absently, then immediately launched into excitement about Camilla making varsity cheerleading as a freshman. The academic program was never mentioned again, and I was too hurt and embarrassed to bring it up myself. There was the time I'd spent months preparing for the regional science fair, working late nights in our garage on a project about water purification systems. I'd been so proud of my research, so excited to show my parents what I'd accomplished. The night before the fair, I asked if they could come watch my presentation. "Oh, honey, that's the same day as Camilla's college interview at Yale," my mother had said, not even looking up from her magazine. "Maybe next time." There never was a next time. Even my high school graduation felt like an afterthought. While other families celebrated their children's achievements, mine spent the entire dinner talking about Camilla's acceptance to law school and debating which luxury car would be most appropriate for her as a graduation gift. I'd received a card with $50 and congratulations that felt obligatory rather than heartfelt. My attempts to gain their approval had been constant and desperate in ways I was only now beginning to understand. I'd volunteered at the local animal shelter every weekend throughout high school, hoping they'd be proud of my compassion and dedication. When I brought it up once, my father had frowned and said, "Why waste time with strays when you could be focused on your future?" Meanwhile, Camilla's minimal volunteer hours at fashionable charity galas were praised as showing her social consciousness and networking skills. I'd worked 2 jobs through community college, not because I wanted to prove my independence, but because I was too proud to ask for help that I knew wouldn't come anyway. While Camilla's college expenses were discussed openly and paid without question, I'd taken out loans, applied for every scholarship I could find, and eaten ramen noodles for months to make ends meet. When I graduated with honors while working full-time, my parents attended the ceremony but spent the entire time discussing Camilla's law school social calendar. Even my relationship with Marcus had been subject to their dismissive attitude. Marcus was a paramedic, hard-working and kind, with plans to eventually become a nurse practitioner. But because he didn't come from money or move in their social circles, my parents treated him like he was somehow beneath our family's standards. Beverly always did aim low, I'd overheard my mother say to a friend once, and the casual cruelty of it had taken my breath away. The pattern was so consistent that I'd learned to expect disappointment, but I'd never stopped hoping that someday something would change, that someday they'd see my kindness when I helped elderly neighbours with their groceries, or recognise my work ethic when I picked up extra shifts to cover for sick co-workers, or appreciate my integrity when I returned wallets I found or stayed late to finish projects perfectly. Sitting in that dining room, listening to them plan Camilla's golden future with money I would never see, I realised that no amount of good behaviour, hard work, or achievement would ever be enough. In their eyes, I would always be the disappointment, the mistake, the child who somehow didn't measure up to their vision of success. The realization was devastating and liberating at the same time, though I wouldn't understand the liberation part until much later. As they continued their animated discussion about investment portfolios and wedding venues, I found myself studying Grandma Dorothy's face. She was watching them with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between sadness and determination. Her jaw was set in a way I'd never seen before, and her eyes had a steely quality that made me wonder what she was thinking about all of this family theatre playing out before us. What happened next changed everything so completely that I still sometimes wonder if I dreamed it. Grandma Dorothy, who had been sitting quietly through the entire painful scene, slowly pushed back her chair and rose to her feet. At 76, she moved deliberately, and there was something in her posture that commanded attention, in a way her usual gentle presence never did. The conversation about Camilla's windfall gradually died as everyone turned to look at Dorothy. She was barely 5 feet tall, her silver hair perfectly styled as always, but in that moment, she seemed to fill the entire room with a quiet authority that made even my domineering father pause mid-sentence. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying more strength than I'd heard from her in years. The dining room fell completely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Even Jonathan stopped fidgeting with his phone to pay attention. Dorothy looked around the table, her gaze resting on each family member, before settling on me with something that looked like love and determination mixed together. "Since we're talking about family legacy and who deserves what," she said, her words measured and precise, "I think it's time for my own announcement." My father's eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Mother, what are you talking about?" Dorothy ignored him and continued looking directly at me. "Martha," she said clearly. And for a moment, I was confused because my name is Beverly, but then I realized she'd meant to say Beverly and had just mixed up the names in her emotion. "Beverly is getting my $2.3 million estate." The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. $2.3 million. The number seemed impossible, surreal, like something from a dream or a movie rather than real life. I stared at my grandmother, certain I'd misheard, while the rest of my family sat frozen in shocked disbelief. My father was the first to find his voice. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his face rapidly turning red with confusion and anger. "Mother, what are you talking about? What $2.3 million? Dorothy smiled. Then a serene expression that seemed to contain decades of quietly watching and judging. "Robert, just because I live quietly doesn't mean I live poorly. I've been investing my late husband's insurance money and my own savings for over 30 years. I have a stock portfolio, several rental properties, and a very healthy retirement account that's been growing beautifully." My mother's mouth had fallen open in a way that would have horrified her if she'd realized it. "Dorothy, you never said anything about having that kind of money. We had no idea you were wealthy." "Wealthy is a relative term," Dorothy replied calmly. "But yes, I've been quite comfortable. I chose not to flaunt it because I wanted to see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing to offer but love and wisdom." Her eyes moved around the table again, and I could see the disappointment in them. "The results have been quite illuminating." Camilla leaned forward, desperately, her composure cracking for the first time since I'd known her. "Grandma Dorothy, surely you don't mean to give it all to Beverly. I mean, I'm the one with the education, the prospects, the future that would honor our family name." But Dorothy's attention had returned to me, and her expression softened with genuine affection. "Beverly has been the only one in this family who has consistently shown kindness, integrity, and genuine love. While the rest of you have been chasing status and money, she's been taking care of people. She helped me through my hip surgery recovery. She visits Mrs. Chen next door every week to check on her groceries. She volunteers at the animal shelter every Saturday, despite working 2 jobs. The mention of these small acts of service things I'd done, simply because they felt right, not because I expected recognition, made my throat tight with emotion. Dorothy had been paying attention to all of it, seeing value in kindness that the rest of my family had dismissed as meaningless. "Beverly is the only one who has ever asked about my health, my feelings, my memories of your father." Dorothy continued, her voice growing stronger. "She's the only one who calls just to talk, who remembers my birthday without being reminded, who has shown me the respect and love that family members should show each other." The explosion that followed Dorothy's announcement was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed in our usually controlled family. My father shot to his feet so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward, his face purple with rage and disbelief. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he shouted. his composure completely shattered. "Mother, you can't be serious about this." Beverly has done nothing with her life. She's a dental assistant who lives in a studio apartment and drives a car that's older than some of her patients. My mother joined in immediately, her voice shrill with panic. "Dorothy, surely you realize this is a mistake. We can contest this. No court would uphold such an irrational decision. Beverly has no experience managing money, no understanding of investments or financial responsibility." But Dorothy remained completely calm in the face of their hysteria, which seemed to make them even more frantic. "Robert, Patricia, I've had 30 years to think about this decision. My will has been prepared by the finest lawyers in Hartford, and it's absolutely ironclad. Beverly will inherit everything because she's the only one who deserves it." Camilla's mask of perfection had completely slipped now, revealing a side of her I'd suspected but never seen so clearly. Tears of rage streamed down her face as she pounded her fist on the table. "This isn't fair. I'm the successful one. I'm the one who made something of myself, who brought honor to this family name. You can't give everything to her just because she's nice." "Nice?" Dorothy's eyebrows rose, and for the first time her voice carried a sharp edge. "Camilla, dear, Beverly isn't just nice. Beverly has character. There's a difference, though. I can see why you might not understand that distinction." The insult hit Camilla like a slap, and she turned to Jonathan for support, but even he looked uncomfortable with her display of entitlement. "Grandma Dorothy," Camilla tried again, forcing her voice into something resembling sweetness. "I've always loved you. You know that. And Beverly loves you too, of course. But surely you can see that I'm better positioned to honor your legacy, to make something meaningful of your generosity." Dorothy's laugh was dry and humorless. "Camilla, the only time you visit me is when your parents make you, and even then you spend the entire time on your phone or talking about yourself. You've never once asked about my life, my experiences, or my feelings about anything. You treat me like a piece of furniture that occasionally needs to be dusted." My father tried a different approach, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Mother, I understand you have affection for Beverly, but surely you realize she's not equipped to handle this kind of responsibility. She's made poor decisions her entire life, community college instead of a real university, working service jobs instead of building a career dating that paramedic, instead of finding someone with real prospects. Poor decisions." Dorothy stood even straighter, and I could see the steel in her spine that had probably helped her survive the depression and raise children in harder times. Robert Beverly worked her way through school while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. She's held steady employment since she was 16 years old. She's in a loving relationship with a man who treats her with respect and kindness. Exactly which of these constitutes a poor decision? The room fell silent as Dorothy continued her voice, gaining power with each word. "You want to talk about poor decisions. Let's discuss raising a daughter who thinks she's entitled to everything simply because she exists. Let's talk about the poor decision to value money and status over character and kindness. Let's examine the poor decision to call your own child worthless in front of her family." My father's face went white at having his own words thrown back at him. "Mother, you don't understand the pressures of raising children in today's world. We had to set standards, had to encourage excellence." "Excellence?" Dorothy's voice was incredulous. "Robert, you encouraged conformity to your narrow definition of success. You never once asked what your daughters wanted, what made them happy, what dreams they might have that didn't fit your predetermined molds." The truth of her words hung in the air like a challenge. I thought about all the times I'd wanted to share my dreams of opening a dental practice, of serving my community, of building something meaningful with my own hands and heart. But I'd learned early that my dreams weren't the right size or shape for my parents' vision of success. Dorothy turned to my mother, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange. "Patricia, you've sat silently through 28 years of watching one daughter be diminished so the other could shine brighter. That's not motherhood. That's favoritism so blatant it constitutes emotional abuse." The words emotional abuse seemed to hit my mother like a physical blow. She'd probably never thought of her behaviour in those terms, but hearing it stated so plainly made the truth impossible to deny. And now, Dorothy continued, her attention moving back to me. "Beverly will have the resources to build the life she's always deserved. She can open that dental practice she's been dreaming about. She can stop working multiple jobs just to survive. She can have the security and freedom to be generous in the ways she's always wanted to be but couldn't afford." I stared at her in amazement. She knew about my dream of opening a practice. She'd been paying attention to everything, understanding more about my hopes and struggles than my own parents ever had. Something fundamental shifted inside me as I watched my family's desperate scrambling to suddenly reposition themselves in the light of Dorothy's revelation. The same people who had just called me worthless were now looking at me with a mixture of calculation, fear, and newfound respect that felt both validating and deeply sad. For the first time in my 28 years, I found my voice in that dining room. Not the quiet, apologetic voice I'd always used with my family, but something stronger and clearer that seemed to come from a place I hadn't known existed inside me. "Stop," I said firmly, and the word carried enough authority that everyone actually did stop talking and looked at me. "Just stop all of this scrambling and calculating and pretending." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand and he actually closed it again, shock clear on his face that I was taking control of the conversation. "Dad, 30 minutes ago you called me worthless. Mum, you nodded and agreed. Camilla, you patted my hand and told me maybe this would motivate me to do something meaningful with my life." My voice was steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. Those weren't heat-of-the-moment words. Those were your true feelings finally spoken, honestly. The uncomfortable shifting around the table told me they knew I was right. These weren't things said in anger that could be taken back or explained away. This was their actual assessment of my value as a person and as their daughter. "Grandma Dorothy," I continued, turning to face her fully, "what you've done tonight isn't just about money. You've given me something I've been desperate for my entire life without even realizing it. You've seen my worth when no one else could or would." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled and nodded encouragingly for me to continue. "But I need all of you to understand something," I said, looking around the table at each family member. "I'm not accepting this inheritance because I want your money or because I want revenge for how you've treated me. I'm accepting it because Dorothy is giving it to me out of love, and because she believes I'll use it to help people and build something meaningful." Camilla leaned forward desperately. "Beverly, we can be a real family now. We can move past all these old misunderstandings and build something beautiful together." I looked at my sister, this person I'd spent my life trying to measure up to, and felt something like pity mixed with sadness. "Camilla, we can't build something that was never there to begin with. You don't even know me. You know the person you've dismissed and overlooked, but you don't know what I think about, what I dream, about what matters to me." My mother tried next, her voice carefully modulated to sound loving and maternal. "Beverly, sweetheart, we've all made mistakes. Family is about forgiveness and moving forward together. You've always been precious to us." "Precious?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Mum, you missed my high school graduation speech because you were getting your nails done for Camila's law school celebration party. You forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. When I had pneumonia last winter and was in the hospital for 4 days, none of you even called to check on me. The specific examples hung in the air like accusations they couldn't deny or explain away. Marcus had been the one to sit by my hospital bed to bring me soup when I got home to take care of me when my own family didn't even know I was sick. "That's going to change now," my father said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to control a situation. "Beverly, we realize we've made some errors in judgment, but family is family and we want to make this right." I stood up slowly, feeling stronger and more centered than I had in years. "Dad, you can't make 28 years of neglect and dismissal right with an apology motivated by money. That's not how healing works. And it's not how relationships are built." Dorothy watched me with pride shining in her eyes, and I could see that this moment, me finding my voice and standing up for myself, was as important to her as the inheritance itself. "I'm going to accept Grandma Dorothy's gift," I announced clearly, "but not because I want to hurt any of you or because I'm trying to get back at you for how you've treated me. I'm accepting it because someone who truly loves me believes I deserve it and because I have plans for how to use it that will honor that love and make a real difference in people's lives." The room was completely quiet now, everyone processing what felt like a fundamental shift in family dynamics. I was no longer the overlooked daughter begging for scraps of attention and approval. I was a woman with resources, with plans, with the backing of someone who believed in my worth. Marcus chose that moment to arrive, letting himself in through the kitchen door, as he'd been told to do. He took one look at the tension in the dining room and immediately came to stand beside my chair, his hand resting supportively on my shoulder. "Everything okay in here?" he asked quietly, but his presence beside me felt like having an army at my back. "Everything's perfect," I said, reaching up to squeeze his hand. "We were just having a long, overdue conversation about family worth and what really matters in life." 6 months later, I stood in the bright, cheerful reception area of Morrison Family Dental Practice, watching my first day of patients filter in with a mixture of nervousness and excitement that felt like Christmas morning. The space was everything I'd dreamed of during those late nights when I'd sketched practice layouts on napkins between shifts at the coffee shop. The walls were painted in warm, welcoming colours, and I'd hung local artwork from students at the community college where I'd graduated. The waiting area had comfortable chairs, children's books, and a small play corner, because I wanted families to feel at home here. Everything about the space reflected my values: accessible, comfortable, focused on caring for people rather than impressing them. Dorothy had been my first patient that morning, insisting on the honour, despite having perfectly healthy teeth. She'd sat in my chair, beaming with pride, while I performed a routine cleaning, both of us marvelling at how much had changed since that devastating dinner 6 months ago. The transformation in my family relationships had been gradual and complicated. My parents had gone through what I could only describe as the stages of grief, starting with denial that Dorothy's will was legitimate, and cycling through anger bargaining and depression before reaching something that resembled acceptance. They called more often now, invited me to family gatherings, and made efforts to show interest in my life, but I could feel the calculation behind their kindness. Camilla had surprised me the most. Losing her special status as the golden child had forced her to examine herself in ways she'd never had to before. She'd started therapy, begun volunteering at a legal aid clinic, and slowly started building what felt like a genuine relationship with me for the first time in our lives. The process was awkward and sometimes painful, but there were moments when I caught glimpses of the sister I'd always hoped we could be. "Your 2 o'clock is here," my receptionist Janice called from the front desk. She was a single mother from my old neighbourhood who'd been struggling to find work that accommodated her childcare needs. Hiring her had been one of my first decisions as a business owner, and watching her confidence grow over the past months had been almost as rewarding as opening the practice itself. My afternoon patient was Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who'd been putting off dental care for years because she couldn't afford it. I'd structured my practice to accept Medicare offer payment plans and provide sliding scale fees because I remembered too well what it felt like to choose between healthcare and other necessities. As I worked on Mrs. Rodriguez's teeth, explaining each step of the process in both English and the Spanish, I'd been learning I thought about the conversation I'd had with Dorothy the previous Sunday. She'd been asking about my plans for the practice, my hopes for expanding services, my ideas for reaching more underserved patients in our community. You know, she'd said thoughtfully, I always wondered what would happen if someone in our family used money as a tool for creating good instead of just accumulating status. You're showing me something I never imagined possible. The inheritance had given me financial security I'd never dreamed of, but more importantly, it had given me the freedom to build a life based on my values rather than my fears. I no longer worked multiple jobs just to survive, no longer lay awake at night worrying about rent or loan payments. Instead, I could focus on providing excellent care to my patients, building a business that served my community, and creating the kind of life that felt meaningful and authentic. Marcus and I had gotten engaged 3 months ago, and we were planning a small ceremony in Dorothy's garden with close friends and the family members who genuinely wanted to celebrate with us. The relationship felt different now that I wasn't desperately seeking approval from people who'd never valued me. I could love Marcus and receive his love from a place of strength rather than neediness. The most profound change wasn't in my circumstances, but in how I saw myself. For 28 years, I'd measured my worth by my family's standards and found myself lacking. Dorothy's gift had forced me to recognize that their standards were narrow, shallow, and ultimately meaningless. Kindness mattered. Integrity mattered. Using your talents to help others mattered. The size of your bank account or the prestige of your job title were just numbers and labels that said nothing about the content of your character. As I finished Mrs. Rodriguez's treatment and scheduled her follow-up appointment, I reflected on how different this felt from my previous job. There, I'd been just another employee following someone else's protocols. Here, I could take the time each patient needed, offer treatment options that prioritized their health over profit, and build relationships that extended beyond purely professional transactions. The phone rang just as I was cleaning up my treatment room. Janice answered in her cheerful, professional voice, then called back to me. Dr. Morrison, it's your grandmother. She says it's not urgent, but she'd love to chat when you have a minute. Dr. Morrison. Even after 6 months, the title still gave me a little thrill. I'd worked so hard for that doctorate, taking classes at night, while working full-time studying in coffee shops and library corners, pushing through exhaustion and doubt because I believed in the dream even when no one else did. Tell her I'll call her back in 15 minutes, I said, smiling as I imagined Dorothy's reaction to being told I was too busy with patients to talk immediately. She loved hearing about the practice's success, about patients whose lives were being improved by accessible dental care, about the small ways I was able to give back to the community that had supported me through my struggles. That evening, as I sat in my new apartment overlooking the river, I found myself thinking about the profound lessons that had emerged from that devastating dinner 6 months ago. The space around me reflected the person I'd become rather than the person I'd thought I should be. Books about business management and community health sat alongside novels and poetry. Photographs showed me with Marcus, with Dorothy, with friends I'd made through volunteer work and professional associations. The decor was comfortable rather than impressive, focused on creating a sanctuary rather than a showpiece. The journey from that moment of humiliation to this place of peace hadn't been easy or quick. There had been nights when I'd cried over the years of feeling invisible and worthless. There had been days when I'd wanted to throw Dorothy's money back at my family and prove I could succeed without any help from anyone. There had been moments when the weight of suddenly having resources felt overwhelming rather than liberating, but slowly, with Dorothy's patient guidance and Marcus's unwavering support, I'd learned to see the inheritance not as money that defined my worth, but as a tool that could amplify the good I was already trying to do in the world. The dental practice wasn't successful because I was wealthy. It was successful because I genuinely cared about my patients and had finally been given the freedom to practice dentistry the way I believed it should be practiced. The relationship with my parents remained complicated and probably always would be. They made efforts now, called regularly, invited me to family events, and spoke proudly of my practice to their friends. But I could still feel the calculation behind their kindness, the way they measured their words and actions based on my new financial status, rather than genuine love or respect for who I was as a person. Camila's transformation had been the most surprising development of all. Losing her position as the favoured child had initially devastated her, but it had also forced her to examine herself in ways she'd never had to before. She'd started therapy, begun doing pro bono legal work, and slowly started building what felt like an authentic relationship with me. We had coffee together once a week now, and these conversations felt different from any interaction we'd ever had before. She asked about my patients, shared her struggles with learning to find validation from internal sources rather than external praise, and sometimes even asked for my advice on navigating relationships without the buffer of special status. The most profound change was in how I understood love and family. For most of my life, I'd believed that love was something you earned through achievement, good behaviour, and meeting other people's expectations. Dorothy had shown me that real love sees and values you exactly as you are, with all your imperfections and struggles. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself so others can shine brighter. Real love creates space for you to grow into your fullest potential rather than trying to squeeze you into someone else's vision of who you should be. I'd also learned that family isn't just the people you're born to, but the people who choose to see your worth and support your growth. Marcus was family, Dorothy was family, Janice, who brought me coffee every morning and listened to my concerns about difficult cases, was family. Mrs. Chen next door, who still called to check on me every Sunday and brought me homemade soup when I worked late, was family. Family was everyone who celebrated your successes without jealousy and supported you through struggles without judgment. The inheritance had given me financial freedom, but the real gift had been the validation that came with it. Dorothy's decision to leave me her estate wasn't just about money. It was a statement that my kindness mattered, my character had value, and my dreams were worth investing in. That validation had given me the confidence to stop seeking approval from people who would never be capable of truly seeing me and start building a life based on my own values and vision. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and how happy she'd looked when I'd told her we could fix her teeth and she wouldn't have to worry about the cost. I thought about the high school student who'd shadowed me that afternoon, her eyes bright with interest in dentistry and her questions showing real aptitude for healthcare. I thought about the plans I was developing with other healthcare providers in the area to create a community clinic that could serve even more underserved patients. This was what success actually looked like. Not the external markers of status and wealth that my parents had chased, but the quiet satisfaction of using your talents and resources to make other people's lives better. Success was going to bed each night, knowing you'd treated people with dignity and kindness. Success was building something that would continue to serve your community long after you were gone. I pulled out my phone to text Dorothy goodnight, as had become our custom. "Thank you," I wrote, "not just for the inheritance, but for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Sweet dreams." Her response came quickly. You've made an old woman very proud. Your grandfather would be amazed by what you've built. Sleep well, my dear granddaughter. Looking back on that horrible dinner 6 months ago, I realised it had been the most important evening of my life. Not because of the money, but because it had finally forced me to stop waiting for other people's approval and start building a life that reflected my own values and dreams. Sometimes the most devastating moments become the doorways to the most beautiful transformations, but only if you're brave enough to walk through them and become who you were always meant to be. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself and your family completely changed? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and finding your own worth, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that their value isn't determined by other people's opinions. Remember that you are worthy of love and respect exactly as you are, and sometimes the most painful experiences lead us to the most beautiful discoveries about ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that your dreams and your kindness matter more than you might realize. Until next time, be gentle with yourselves and keep believing in your own worth.